Hello, I'm Lou Engle. We are living in a moment of history. The world is shaking and God is moving for justice in the earth. You know, it was in the days of Finney, he spoke, days of abolition, the days of revival. He spoke this and said, "Every southern breeze is loaded down with the sound of lamentation, mourning, and woe. 2 million degraded slaves in our own land stretched their hands all shackled and bleeding and set forth to the church of God the agonizing cry for help. And shall the church, in her efforts to reclaim and save the world, deafen her ears to this voice of agony and despair? God forbid. The church cannot turn away from this question. God will push it to a decision." I believe that right now, 61 million babies' voices are crying from the ground for a decision from heaven. And I believe, even with the rising right now of Amy Coney Barrett, that God is driving Roe v. Wade to a decision in the Supreme Court. The church cannot have a deaf ear toward the cries of the unborn and the mothers that really this is going to be answered. It's so stunning to me that 3-4 years ago, my friend Matt Lockett, who works and leads for the ministry of Bound for Life, had a dream. And in the dream, he was the bodyguard of Vice President Pence's wife. And she was all concerned about who would be the next justice of the Supreme Court. And in the dream, he comes to her, takes her by the shoulders and says, "Remember the name, Amy Coney Barrett." Wow. For 3 years we've been praying, and then suddenly, in the midst of the virus, in the midst of the election chaos, God drives the conversation from the coronavirus to the court. I believe God is saying, I'm going to drive this to a decision. I was apprehended with the calling of ending of abortion in 2003. I was actually flying home from Canada reading the biography of William Wilberforce, the great parliamentarian who ended the slave trade in Great Britain. I was reading a quote by him in this book by Thomas Clarkson, an abolitionist in that movement. And he said this, "I urged myself that never was any cause which had been taken up by man in any country or in any age so great and important. Never was there one in which so much good could be done, never one in which the duty of Christian charity could be so extensively exercised, never one more worthy of devotion of a whole life toward it, and that if a man thought properly, he ought to rejoice to have been called into existence if he were only permitted to become an instrument in forwarding the cause in any part of its progress." Clarkson henceforth dedicated his own life to discovering and exposing the evils of the slave trade. I had an encounter with the Lord the moment I read that, and the Lord said, "For the rest of your life, you will raise up a prayer movement for the ending of abortion." I was weeping on the plane, and I have been shaken with this calling now since 2003. God, end abortion, send revival to America. Out of this, we gathered 70 young people to Colorado Springs in 2004 to fast and pray for 24 hours a day and night for 50 days and 50 nights, praying for a pro-life president, praying for pro-life judges, and praying for the healing of the races, and that God would do something that would literally turn the nation and end abortion. Out of this 50 days and 50 nights, a young man that had been fasting and praying for 2 years, a Daniel fast for the ending of abortion, had a dream. And in the dream, he saw thousands of people in DC with tape on their mouths with the word life written on it. And we moved to DC with 70 kids, and we put that tape on our mouths, not as a protest, but as a silent prayer meeting to give voice to those who have no voice in intercession. We've been praying for 16 years. When we went to D.C. prior to those elections in 2004, we had been praying for the Supreme Court, and a stunning thing took place. I received a phone call as the kids were standing 30 days in front of the Supreme Court with tape on their mouths. And I received a phone call from a lady that worked in the Supreme Court. And she said, I heard you wanted a special tour of the Supreme Court. I said, yes, ma'am, I'd love that. She said, meet me on the side door of the Supreme Court. I meet her. She tells me her story. She says, I lived in Florida, and years ago, I had received a prophetic word, and that word said that someday you would be working in the Supreme Court, and in that time, Roe v. Wade would be overturned. She said, I moved to D.C. I am working in the Supreme Court, and I'm believing that Roe v. Wade will be overturned. And then she said, a few weeks ago, I had a dream that Justice Ruth Ginsburg came to me and asked me to be her assistant. Stunningly, she said, last week, Justice Ginsburg asked me to be her assistant. I'm talking to the assistant of Ruth Ginsburg. I said, and I asked this question, is there a basketball court in the Supreme Court building? I heard there is. And she says, as a matter of fact, there is one, and it is exactly on top of where the Supreme Court holds its hearings, and they call it the highest court in the land. I said, take me to that court. I stood in that court and I prayed over the Supreme Court. Those justices said, God, I call for the ending of Roe v. Wade, and that God, you would raise up pro-life justices. I'm looking now 16 years later, a woman takes the place of Ruth Ginsburg, the most pro-choice woman who's presided over the death of millions of babies. And a woman takes her place that is pro-life. I've got to believe God answered my prayer in that very courtroom on a basketball court, a court that's the highest court in the land. As we stood in front of the Supreme Court, one of our young men said, hey, if we would turn this life tape into life bands, like the Live Strong bands, we could start a Martin Luther King movement to end abortion like they did in Birmingham in the civil rights movement. I said, oh, that would be amazing. We could have a band and we could pray a prayer to that band. And if we prayed it 5 times a day, 1 million people, it'd be 5 million prayers a day. And I said, but we don't need a good idea. I want to know it's God. The next day, a young African-American walked by and he said, hey, you guys, if you would turn that life tape into life bands like the Live Strong bands, I'd go back to my hometown, Birmingham, and start a Martin Luther King movement to end abortion. We were in shock and awe. We wrote a prayer to this band. Jesus, I plead your blood over my sins and the sins of my nation. God, end abortion. Send revival to America. We believe we've come to a moment in history where every voice must be counted. People like Danielle Helmer are raising up this wall movement, calling for adoptions. We've been praying for 1 million adoptions for 16 years. What if churches all across America would adopt a baby and the church would help the people that bring in that child? What if prayer meetings are held in every church and in living rooms across America for the end of abortion? What if, and we are calling for this, what if everyone listening to this would actually get a life band from Bound for Life, boundforlife.com. You could order these bands and you would pray this prayer. Millions of us, Jesus, I plead your blood over my sins and the sins of my nation. God, end abortion. Send revival to America. Literally, this is our only court case before the throne of God. 61 million babies crying out, their blood crying out for judgment. But there is a better blood that speaks better than the blood of Abel. God, have mercy on America. Give us a great revival. End abortion and let your blood cover our sins. And so I want to encourage you. Start prayer meetings in your homes, in your businesses, in your churches. Number 2, pray that Bound for Life prayer movement. Join the Bound for Life movement and pray this band, get these bands, and start a massive movement of prayer. I believe we're in such an hour to change history, and we'll tell our grandchildren we were there when Roe v. Wade was ended and abortion is no longer legal. And then we took all the babies because God's heart is for the children.